Hello, I'm your host, Bobby King, and I'm here to talk with you about something you might not expect. This podcast is a place where we talk to people who are willing to share their thoughts on the church today. This will be pastors, Christians, non-Christians, the average church attender, other religious members, people who have never experienced church before. I want to give people the opportunity to have a true and open conversation. Join us on the couch of your mind for Church Conversations. Monster, sponsor us. What's up, everybody? This is Bobby King, and this is Church Conversations. This has been an episode literally that has not wanted to be made. First, we did it online. That didn't meet our level and standard of excellence. And now we are sitting in the dark. So if the colors and things like that look weird, it's what we tried to do in post to fix it. But the power is out in our building, and so everything we're running off of is battery powered right now. So we're getting the episode done. That's all that matters. And it's important because y'all don't know this, but I've been wanting Brandon to be the second episode of this podcast since the start of the podcast. And so we're trying to make that still happen. And now if we can get this done today, it's going to happen. But this is Brandon Barton.
Hey, everybody.
He is my best friend. He's my discipler. And honestly, the only person that immediately came to mind, one, when I was talking about a podcast, two, talking about the church. He has honestly shaped my view of church and how, what I experience church and community, and even, how I view and respect and understand, the Lord. And so with that, he was the most fitting person to be on the second episode of this podcast because of how much he's shaped it in my life. And I wanted that to be a thing before y'all, get to see some other people and other people's examples and things like that. So I thought it was key to have Brandon. So Brandon, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. My name is Brandon Barton. I've grew up in Bryan College Station. Was there for the majority of my young life. It's where I've started my relationship with Jesus. It's where I started into ministry life. I met my wife there. We moved up to the Metroplex area back in 2008. I worked at a few churches, larger churches around the area, and just had a stint with Lake Church from about 2012 to about 2020. And yeah, it was pretty remarkable for us to be able to see so many different facets and areas of church and how ministry is done, not just from across the world, but also here locally in serving communities.
It's awesome. So first, let's get this main one out of the way. It's our main question, right? It's what the podcast exists for. But essentially, to you, what is your definition of church?
Yeah, I think it's definitely how the Bible defines it, right?
Yeah.
And why it was started in the first place. It was as a community place for people together, and also to serve others who are less fortunate in the community as well. That's why it was designed. The church was designed that way, to help the elderly and the widows, and to be able to come together as a group to serve the God, the Father, the Son, who created us. And so that's how I really define church. Now that's taken a different direction in a lot of ways. But I still feel like if you ask anyone in church atmosphere, a lot of them would say the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that it's key because you touched on some of the parts that most people forget, right? So a lot of people think, hey, it's a church, it's four walls. This is, I go to church, right? When in reality,
You are the church.
You just mentioned, you are the church, right? It's body of believers gathering together, but even just as family units, as,
Yeah.
all of those different things. But then also caring for groups that are majorly marginalized,
Yeah.
widows, orphans, the needy, all of those different
Right.
things. And so that's a huge key and important part that I think is very interesting. So, Brandon, because you are who you are in my life and all those things, I have an inside look of, life with you and all those different stuff. So let's shift back a little bit to COVID era and things of that nature. What do you think, like, I guess pre-COVID church, post-COVID church, is it the same thing? Is it different? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I had different arenas. So I was actually in church ministry pre-COVID, in the start of COVID, and then I transitioned out to be more of in a sales role at a company here locally. So my take might be a little different than most. I think that ministry as a whole, in the way the church functioned before, I think we just got comfortable. We got comfortable with the way things were, the way church had always been. I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not something that, and I think I was desensitized to it to a point as well. Right. That I kind of missed the whole aspect and the whole what church should be in a lot of people's lives. And I think that as it comes to whole, and I think this is what I see a lot, and especially now that I work more with kids and teenagers probably than I ever did previously.
Yeah.
There's a disconnect between how we approach Sunday to how we approach the rest of the week, where it always should be the same. But Sunday is reserved for church. Let me go punch my card, say I've been to church, and then now I'm going to go and I'm going to take Monday through Saturday and I'm going to live it the way that I feel like I need to live it.
Yeah.
And I think from a ministry side of things, seeing that in the church, that's exhausted church staffs and church leadership, because it's like we're fighting uphill battle. But it's also, to the rest of the week, how are we carrying our message to the people from Monday through Saturday?
Yeah.
And how are we showing that? How are we leading them in that? And I think that's I think that's where Satan likes to kind of inject little things here and there to where it seems to continue to divide what Sunday looks like as opposed to the rest of the week.
Yeah, and I think that's great. Like, and if I were to just summarize it up into a one little sentence, is like, we have really become accustomed of attributing Sundays or whatever religious day, Saturdays for some denominations, things like that, but like Sunday as church, when in reality, church has been and always will be the entire time. It's all day. It's 24/7, 365. And we've really become accustomed to, anytime we go to a building that has the name church on it, then we're at church.
Right.
And that mind shift change, one is something that I'm kind of seeing a little bit more of, but being on church staffs as well, working with a bunch of churches, it's been so easy in the past to get in this routine of, oh man, like, okay, cool, I'm going to church. Or with us on church staffs and what we used to do, we were always at church.
Right.
And then it became really weird because it's your job, but then like, it's also like God's holy place. And it's like, man, so kind of weird and all those different concepts.
Yeah.
But summing up in one sense, like, church is 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
It ain't Sunday. It's not a specific building.
Right.
It's the body of believers. We're the bride of Christ. Like,
yeah, and I think that's where we as a whole need to come back to. I think that we were talking about pre-COVID. You saw a lot of programs and a lot of different situations where we felt like that was church. Yep. Where if I put on this many programs, I had this many people come to my program, then it was successful, and that's what marked success for churches in a lot of ways. And then COVID happened, and now we couldn't bring people into church.
Yep.
It was hard for that to happen. So there was some really hard times within COVID in churches as a whole, but there's also some really beautiful things that came out of that. Mm-hmm. You started to see churches really delving back into community. How can we serve the hospitals? How can we serve the people around us that are in need? And I think we missed the mark. And I think it's because COVID is it's still present, but it's not as present as it was before. I feel like some churches are navigating back to the normal. How many programs can I have? What are we? How many Bible studies can we put during a week? Bible studies are great, but the problem with Bible studies is if you leave that there, then you're not carrying it into the community. You're not carrying it into other people's lives. It's what it was designed to do in the first place.
Yeah.
And so we've got to figure out what does success look like in the church, as we've kind of navigated pre-COVID, COVID, and now post-COVID. What does this look like moving forward? Because I think COVID really opened our eyes to what a lot of ministry could be, but then we fall back into comfortability, and it's still, we're still navigating and trying to figure out that 80 years pre-COVID that just churches continued to be all these, programs and numbers and everything else. And that marks success in church should be the people, should be how am I carrying Christ to my neighbor? How am I carrying Christ to that coworker? That's the way the church should be motivated.
Yep. Yeah. The key analytic point that churches need to be looking at is not how many people come to X event or how many people donated or what our church attendance was. It's the measurable. It's very difficult to measure, but the measurable of life change.
Sure.
What does life change happen in our church? Are people going through something and the Lord's brought them out? Have they partnered with a ministry that, boom, they were able to find their calling? Are they being discipled? Are they being cared for? Are they helping other people? Are they holding other people's arms up when they're going through something? Like those things, a million times harder to do than counting heads.
Right.
But way more kingdom importance.
Sure.
In my mind, you could have a church of 5 people, but the life change that's happened in that building could radically shake the kingdom.
Sure.
In a way that a church of 5,000 that people are just, check it off. Okay, I've come to church. Like if you have 5,000 people sitting on their butts, and then there's 5 people out there doing the work of the kingdom in their calling.
Yeah.
The 5 people are going to have way better success in whatever they're doing.
Sure.
And so that's something that I hope that even though this post-COVID world, we're already going back, I hope we have another reset moment. Because in reality, that's what COVID, I believe, really was.
I agree.
100%. This COVID is not going to be the first, and it was not going to be the last pandemic kind of thing to happen. But with it, it was such a hard reset. And honestly, I feel like it was just very directed at the church of, hey, we've been doing things this way. I'm a wreck it.
Yeah.
And whatever, stance you want to lean on, of whether it's God fixing it or it's Satan's hand on it, I don't really care. As Christians, we're able to look at it and be like, man, this was a pivot change point that can drastically impact the kingdom of heaven forever.
Yeah.
How do we do it? How do we make an impact on it? And I think you're right. Churches are going back to what they used to do, where I think we really need to dive in deeper into this world of the unknown,
100%.
which is the digital age and things like that. Not really because, hey, I have a media thing that I do churches with. Like, I don't care about that. The ability to reach people has never been able to be done as quick or as effectively as we can today.
Right.
And it's just going to get better and better and more effective moving forward.
Quicker. Yeah.
And so, I encourage churches to think with that lens.
Yeah.
Don't go back to just what we know,
Right.
because we can do it and we can measure it. Like, please start thinking out of the box. Like, don't hire same staff members with the same staff titles just because that's what you've had in the past.
Absolutely.
Like, think about what your church actually needs. If that's community engagement, if that's, social media, if that's whatever, think differently.
Well, and I think that, and I want everyone to hear me say this is when I talk about the church, I'm not talking about just the pastor or just a group of staff. I'm talking about the church as a whole, which in large part is just to lay people in the church. That's the large majority of a church.
Correct.
And so I feel like this podcast is something that everyone should hear. Everyone needs to hear, because the pastor and the staff are not the church.
Yep.
That they are leaders within the church, but they are not the church. The people are the church. The people are the bride of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So how am I as a body piece, as a body member, how am I showing Christ to those in the world? How do we best move forward with any kind of program or anything else that we need to throw away the statistics of it all and ask the question, how is this getting to the heart of the person? How is Christ getting to this person? How that should be our only metric that we care about.
Yeah.
And I say that as a member of a church. And I will always say that as a member of a church, because it is not the pastor's and the staff's role to carry out the full projection of what church should be.
You better preach.
That's the people's job.
Yep.
The pastors are there to facilitate and navigate encouragement and teaching and growth. So I want that to be very clear when we talk about church as a whole, because I think that a lot of people's mind frames is, oh, the church are the pastors and I belong to a church. No, you are the church.
Yeah.
And we've got to get out of that mentality in a big way.
And also, like, we don't want to disacknowledge or disqualify church staff people either, right?
Sure.
Like, they play a factor in the body.
Yeah.
Like, they are not the church. They are also a part of the church.
Right.
And so with that, they just may be a mouth, or they may be a hand, or whatever. But we need all aspects of a finger to grab something.
100%.
Like, we need all ligaments in an arm to be able to move it.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, all of those individual pieces play a big factor in the whole aspect, which is us being the bride of Christ. Right? We are not, as individuals, perfect. Also, the church is not perfect this side of eternity.
Correct.
Right? But coming together, bringing all of our strengths, all of our weaknesses, that we can lift each other up, help each other, but then also, like, be encouraged by and strengthened. Everybody's strengths all together. Like, you see it in sports all the time. When everybody's strengths are together, man, they're clicking.
Yeah.
Like, when you have every single individual doing their job, doing their role, doing their calling, stuff happens. Yeah. Like, and that's what we need to start viewing the church as.
Absolutely.
In a lot of ways, the structure of how church is, master teacher, it's very Roman classroom setup. And we know that, community is built in circles, not in rows. But with that as well, like, the structure of church in itself is, we need to be, one, you mentioned it, is like, it's not our job to be fed by church staff members. We have to feed ourselves. Right? Like, in a lot of ways, even in mentor discipleship relationships, like, your job is not to feed me.
Correct.
Like, my job is to feed myself based off of how you are in your walk living with Christ, just a step in front of me. And that's all that it literally is if someone is
sometimes behind you, sometimes beside you.
Yes. And literally, if you just have one step in front, then that person can disciple you. And so with that, like, I'm following you as you follow Christ.
Right.
And then it's my job to then have somebody following me as I follow Christ.
Correct.
And as long as we're one step in front of the other, then we literally are just going towards what we're supposed to do, which is being like, as best as we can, be like Jesus.
Correct. And I think that's been a big frustration of mine in the whole time I've been in ministry is, a lot of people bring their children or the youth or, and they bring them to church saying, here, you teach my kids and my youth what Jesus is. And then that's your job.
Yeah.
That is so against Scripture, it's not even funny.
Yep.
That is the parents' role and job in this. We're, as ministers, we're there to support that.
Yep.
And so at some point we've got to get to a place where, and I said this before, and we were talking about the podcast we recorded before this. It is a natural thing for us as a whole to bring bring people together, right? As ministers, we bring people together. We navigate that, but it is not my responsibility as a minister to teach Jesus to your kid.
Yep.
Or to your youth. That is the express responsibility of a parent or a guardian. And our job is to then replicate that and encourage you in that. We've got to get to the point where we leave behind, and I think that if the church would ever get to a point, that's what I was going to say. I was sitting here going, okay, I know I said this before, and I just recircled. I'm coming back.
We did this entire
we did the whole
already.
podcast. It was so many things. So
it was like almost a week and a half, 2 weeks ago.
But the church as it sits right now in America would not have to be in place if the parents and those responsible for others to know Christ would be doing the job and role that they were put in. There would not need to be these different levels of church and church leadership. We would navigate pretty much like we were supposed to whenever the church was instilled. But because we've made it the way that it is, because the people of the community and stuff like that bring their kids to church to learn about Jesus, now it's been placed on our backs to teach and navigate Christ to those. And I'm not saying that we don't play a role in that, but that should not be something that falls directly on a minister's shoulders.
No,
in any form.
And also, just even specifically, like if we want to get into the details of it, it shouldn't have to fall on a minister's shoulders who's also probably a very young person. If we're mathematically looking at it, most of the time, kids pastors, youth pastors, they're the younger people on staff.
True.
And we're giving them honestly the hardest job.
Yeah.
Like,
it's good.
If you want to set people up for failure, I don't know a better way how to do it.
Ding, ding, ding.
Literally. And that's why you see crazy turnover in those kind of roles as well. And like those of you who aren't Christians, like these things may sound foreign or whatever, but like normally, if you're a young person, you're normally overseeing younger people.
Right.
Well, with that, like that structure is inherently just broken. I mean, outside of the fact that, the parents should be discipling their kids and all those things, we can't also expect that now either, because the way that the world and the way the church has kind of gone for the last, I don't know, almost 2,000 years, like with how it's been structured in that way, it's been really handcrafted where, hey, we're bringing them here because we don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
And that's good. I'm happy they feel like they can bring them somewhere.
Sure. Yeah.
But also at the same time, we as the church are missing the fact that, man, we really need to be pouring into these parents better. And like, what do these young families look like?
Right.
And all those different things. That's the real heartbeat that, oh, this is the thing.
Right.
Maybe let's not spend as much time with, adults that have been, Christians for the last 25, 30 years. No offense to those people. We love them.
Sure.
They should be discipling these young families.
Absolutely.
Like that's the whole point. They've lived that life. They've been through that life stage. Be able to help.
Yeah.
Every time a new family comes in, boom, pair them with somebody that's been there 10, 15 years.
Right.
Or even 5 months. Like, it don't matter. As long as they've known and seen something, let's just start making connections. And that brings me to a quick side angle of this, of a question is mentor and discipleship, what difference? And then also, how do you do that as a dad of a family? How do you actually disciple and be a representation of the church when your family's together? Y'all are the bride of Christ, just like me and my family are. And so, like, how do you navigate doing that?
Yeah, I think if we talk about discipleship versus mentorship, the staff that I was on at the church that I'm attending right now, we spent 6 to 8 months just defining what discipleship was. And we came up with, we teach and model the ways of Jesus to reliable people who will then teach and model the ways of Jesus. That we like the teaching part, but when it comes to modeling, that to me, that's the difference in discipleship and mentorship. Mentorship, you walk them through knowledge base, right? You walk, this is how you do your job. This is how you do this. And modeling is what you're doing then to show them the right way to do things.
Yep.
And so discipleship is bringing someone into your life, and the mentorship is adding something to your life. So you add, when you mentor someone, you add them to your schedule. When you disciple someone, you bring them into your schedule. You bring them into your life.
Man, it's almost like his discipler taught him that phrase. That's interesting. That's wild.
Maybe a little bit. But as far as my kids go, I had a really big revelation in 2020 that, I always thought that my legacy was what I was doing at the church.
Wow.
How I was navigating the day-to-day, how I was doing ministry. What God really kind of helped secure in my life there in 2020 was my legacy are my 3 kids. That's who I'm leaving behind. So I have to pour into them, teaching and modeling the ways of Jesus.
Yep.
And we have some easy conversations about that, but we have some hard conversations about that. And I don't think it necessarily matters what conclusion we come to. It's the fact that my kids get to experience Christ through their dad and through their mom.
Yeah.
And that's how we navigate discipleship within our house. Sure, we read the Bible, we sing worship songs. My daughter helps lead with me on, times where I get to lead worship, and she's
ridiculously talented,
incredibly talented, more talented than I am.
He can say it, but as an outsider,
100%.
She's ridiculous.
I'm very realistic when it comes to my kids, but
true. But they may not know
that's
that,
true.
But
that's true.
She's going places.
Yeah, she is. But the fact that I get to see that I get to see, Christ followership from my kids start to kind of take place, see that maturity, not just in their physical and emotional respects, but then their spiritual on top of that.
Yeah.
It's a huge thing. It's way more rewarding than anything I ever did in full-time ministry. And God kind of helped me. Brandon, you are going to be in ministry the rest of your life in some form.
Yep.
This is your main ministry. And it took a big revelation for that to actually strike gold.
But also, I think that it's a key thing that happened in your life to be able to allow you to focus on it with such accuracy, right? Like most church staff people negate their families.
Sure.
For the sake, I'm having to be up at church for this event, or I have to leave. It's midnight. This person went to the hospital. Those things are great things.
Sure.
They're amazing things. And it takes special hearts and things of that nature to be able to do it. But normally it comes on the back end of neglecting your family.
Sure.
Which nobody in the church would say that they want or support.
No.
But also at the same time, normally it's kind of what is expected.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a kind of a part of your job. And
Sure.
so it was amazing with your reset of where it's like, hey, spotlight your family.
And I think I use this time in a very strategic way is to those watching this, pray for your church leadership.
Yes.
I've heard it so many times in ministry. Brandon, what do you do all day? And if I honestly wrote it down for you, you would be appalled at what I did every single day. Just how much time and effort went into everything that I was doing. But it almost came, it came to a prideful head, right? So I felt like the church couldn't function without me. And that was, I mean, it's hard realization, right? Because you're pouring your blood, sweat, tears on literally all 3 of those, multiple times a year specifically, but almost every week, to be able to do what you feel like God's asking you to do. But what we're not seeing, what I wasn't understanding, was that Satan was throwing a little bit of lie in with some of that truth, where I would listen to myself more than I would listen to God and what he was trying to do. He was trying to slow me down, and I just kept speeding up. And church staffs, because of the weight that is on their shoulders, a lot of them are going through that or have gone through it before, or may, if some of the young ones may go through it here eventually. It will happen to every one of them, just because of the weight that's on the shoulders. So
it's structured.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Yeah. And so I just kind of put that plug out there because I don't know if I quite understood being on staff, how much prayer affects us,
Yeah.
and having people actually reach out and say, hey, how can I pray for you? What does that look like? Well, how can I come alongside you and help? It was happening. I just wasn't paying attention to it. So I think it's
But it
a
was
really good
happening
thing.
at a rarer clip than you would
Yeah,
think.
probably.
Like, right? Like in
Yeah.
a church of our size,
Right.
you know, a little north of 1,000,
Sure.
right? The amount of people that theoretically that should be happening from should be more.
Sure.
But it was very, nice when it did happen. But in your case, like being able to even realize and recognize like, oh, that was happening, or
Yeah.
people were requesting it. But yeah, it's pray for your church staff
Yes.
because they navigate things that they feel like they in a lot of ways have to do themselves, when in reality they need to be able to share that burden with somebody else or help somebody else. Like we are never, and I may get some flack for this, but we may never be the one solution for somebody. Right? Like if I have something going on in my life, like Brandon is normally one of the first calls that I give. But if I only applied Brandon's advice, that's a mistake. Like I also get advice from my wife, other people that have speaking influence over certain topics. Brandon and my wife have universal speak, over my life and influence. But then there's people I have in different areas for different things, right? Just like you would bring in a plumber to fix your plumbing or your electrician to fix your electricity. Like I have those kind of people for my spiritual walk. I have somebody that's really good at this and their prayer life is amazing. I have somebody over here for this that's more counseling and being able to speak ideas and things off of each other. A lot of times church staff members feel like they have to be that for everybody, all roles, all the time for every individual that comes. And that's extremely burdensome.
And burnout happens a lot of the time because
burnout happens.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that we as a whole, as a collective, we have to understand that church being the way that it is. When I say that it's the collective whole, that's why it's so important for everyone to be a part.
Yeah.
Everyone to, and I hate using the word pull their own weight because everybody pulls a different weight.
True.
So that's not really the word, but it's there's not really a better term to come with than that. Whenever you have people that just come in on Sundays and then leave, I heard this so many times until I really got to the depths of it, that 15% of the people do 85% of the work. That's why there's such a stress on leadership within the church, because there really isn't a lot of people to help out with. But also there's a navigation that you as a collective unit of a church, you have to be a part of investment in the staff as well. If I could have had someone that came to me as a layman in the church and really just set me down and said, Brandon, I need to pray for you. Like, I need to help you. How can I help you? First of all, I wouldn't know what to say right off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But
most wouldn't.
But it would be something that would make me think about what was going on. And if they physically could see that in me, how can I allow them to help? Love this guy. He came at a perfect time to help out when I felt like I had the whole world falling on my head. But it was definitely something that we have to get to the point. Don't be afraid of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to open up to people and say, hey, this is something that bothers me. This is something that I don't understand. This is something I need help with. When we talk about discipleship, there are things that you've taught me as well as the things that I've taught you.
It's being said here on
it is
forever record. This is going to be on the internet.
I'll never tell him this in person. This is just for you.
Just this part and play it back on my bad days.
But there is, when you're in any kind of relationship, you're giving and taking.
Yeah.
And I think it's really one of the most beautiful things I've seen is how discipleship just continues to have that give and take within it. It's incredibly important for your daily walk, because there may be things you experience during your day that if you have a disciplee, that disciplee can speak into, or vice versa, or someone who's not that. Don't be afraid of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Don't hold everything in and allow Satan to sit there and just let that fester within you, because out of that comes incredible defeat and deceit and manipulation to the point where you can't see which way's up. So we were meant and designed for community.
Facts.
That's why the church was made. So don't run away from that.
Yeah.
Run towards that.
That's good. Okay, last section of questions,
Okay.
because it's a two-parter.
It's a
Slasher.
Five-parter?
It's a slasher.
Five-parter.
So what is the church doing good? What is the church doing bad? Where can we improve upon? You don't have to take it on a negative connotation if you don't want to, but you also can if you want to as well.
This is hard because I think there's churches that do a lot of things right.
Yep.
There's churches that do a lot of things different.
Yep. Because this is in reference to Church Conversations is in regards to capital C church.
Right.
Like at our local church, there may be things that we don't do as well as another church, but then there's things that we may do amazingly better than another church.
Correct.
So this is in reference to capital C church. What is the church doing good? What is it doing bad?
Yeah, the capital C church, there is a lot of hurt people in this world. There's a lot of people dealing with addictions. Growing up, we didn't talk about those things.
Nope.
And if we did, it was something that was swept under the rug, or you were, taken out without, further. I don't say taken out. It sounds horrible. You were taken out. Yeah. That is not what I meant. Well, not here in the American church. But there were things that you just didn't talk about, and you didn't. Nobody seemed like it was equipped to even handle some things like that.
We're still,
and I still don't think that the majority of the church is for that.
Yeah.
But I've seen it done. I've had church discipline happen in my life, and I've seen it done with beauty and grace and mercy.
Yeah.
And so I think if we're talking about church, Big C Church improving, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Because I think that could be something that would send revival through our nation, at least, if not the world. If people are struggling, how do we come alongside them? Not saying to let them off, because I think there's healing and grace in the hard. If you would have asked me 3 years ago, I would have told you that wasn't right. But I've been through it, and it is true. But I also think that the church as a whole needs to get back to the community. I think that's what we saw within COVID, and I referenced that at the beginning of our time. We understood what the community needed, and we weren't afraid to go do it. I want to see the church do that, the Big C Church do that in every level, in every community across this nation and world. What the church is doing great is we have the doors open. We invite people in. I feel like when people enter the church, for the most part, they are seen and they are loved. It's not the case everywhere, but I would say as far as the Big C Church goes, I think that the missions is something that the Big C Church is maybe not traditionally had done well in the past, but probably within the last 20 years and moving forward, missions is a big deal and a big focus, which I think is great. And I think that as a leadership, I think the leadership's idea of church to the community and working together. I mean, I see this in just our community here in Arlington. I see pastors and lay leaders of the church coming around our community leaders, finding where the pain points are and helping address that. I see a lot of grace and mercy within really hard topics of the community as well that's being addressed by those here in the community, both church leadership and lay leadership.
Yeah.
So here in Arlington specifically, and I feel like there's others around the world that is doing that as well. They're finding those moments that they can impact the world for the kingdom, which is very important and one of the biggest things. But community, getting to the community has to be a focus. 50 years ago, the community came to church.
Yeah.
Now It doesn't.
Nope.
So how does the church get to the community?
Yeah, it's that model that we've definitely talked about before.
Right.
And I actually don't know if I've mentioned it in any of the videos up to this point, but the Field of Dreams model of church
Yeah. If you build it, they will
is
come.
gone.
Yeah.
Like, just because you build something, just because you have a building, just because you occupy a section of the street does not mean that people are physically going to come into your building. Where
Correct.
that was like the number one form of advertising.
Absolutely.
Like, you had that in the Yellow Pages.
It's like Starbucks,
Like,
church on every corner.
exactly.
Right. And
and in Texas and where we're at, that is kind of true. Like, literally, there's a street in Dallas, I can't remember it. I counted one time 37 churches on this one street. And it's a longer street.
Sure.
Give it credit, but
Sure.
like, it blew my mind. But yeah, that model doesn't exist anymore. We have to be active participants in our community, in our neighborhoods, in our just work people's lives.
Right.
Like, also, just quick, it could be a whole other podcast episode conversation, but like, just because people are on church staffs don't mean that they're any extra more spiritual or any extra more holy than the person at a sales department at a company, or the gas station attendant, or like a trash compactor person. Like,
garbage man.
no, I was gonna give them the. I've definitely heard, like, I feel like I've heard garbage man as like a more technical term, and I know it exists, but I tried and butchered it. So anyway,
Oh, you just butchered that too, so it's okay.
it's great. Or a butcher, even like
Or a butcher. We can do butcher. Yeah.
But regardless, like, you being a Christian and someone who has been impacted by the life of Jesus in wherever sphere you work and operate in, man, like, that's a big deal. And so that's again,
your
that's a whole
ministry.
other thing. Yeah.
That's your ministry. That's
Yep.
where God's put you to serve. So how are you serving that well? And I
Mhm.
think that, I had a mentor that was walking with me, and, work as worship was a big thing that he would always say. How is your work? How is worship being impacted, or how's work being impacted by your worship? And that really made me think a lot. How am I viewing my work as worship? It was easy when I was in ministry. But it became a lot different whenever I went to the secular world. And honestly, I've created relationships and impacted the kingdom more at my work than I did at church. And I'll be the first to tell you that.
Yeah.
It has been incredible to watch God mold these relationships and friendships. And they know who I am. They know that I've been a pastor and that I am an ordained pastor still. They still come to me and ask for prayer or other things within their lives. And so they know that I'm a safe place to be able to have those conversations. So to see my work as worship has completely changed the way that I view what I do on a day-to-day thing.
Okay. Last thing. What is anything that you want to share with the people watching? What's something that either we talked about that you want to go slightly into more depth on, or what's another takeaway for church conversations for people watching this that may be Christians, may not be Christians? Like, what's something that you want to give some extra knowledge
I
on?
think isolation is one of Satan's largest wins in this. And we saw it a lot in COVID, right? So there was, like I said, there was some hard things. There were some beautiful things. This is a hard thing. People are isolated more. You were not meant to do life alone. I want to say it again. You were not meant to do life alone. God made you for community. And if you're not involved with a church in some form, you have to get to that point, because you can't, I'm sorry, but your bar friends aren't going to love and care for you the way that those who are followers of Christ will. I would say that, I know that we have emphasis on introverts and extroverts and the anxiety that people have. God said, "Come to me, all those who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest." He does that with community. It might be anxiety for some, but if you will just look to Jesus and not worry about the anxiety around you, I promise that will be more fulfilling than anything else. It involves being vulnerable.
And any introvert or extrovert. I always try not to make it negative towards introverts because that's not who I am.
Well, I think that we're the wrong people to be asking about what introverts feel.
Correct. But essentially on the introvert spectrum,
Sure.
like if you're leaning that way, you also can't tell me that you don't have your tight knit of friends or friend.
Sure.
You do.
Absolutely.
You have people that are inside that inner circle.
Yep.
It's just you let them in for some reason. You were able to be vulnerable with them.
Sure.
Man, church is a great place to foster that. It's a great place to foster that mindset and community environment of being able to just let your guard down.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter your personality.
Right.
Like these are people that in reality, we all have the same goal and focus. And that is that we want people in the kingdom tomorrow
100%.
that aren't in there today.
Yep.
And if we can all agree on that, then we're all friends in my book. Like that's how that works. But as an extrovert, but even as an introvert, these people have the same mission as you.
Right.
It may be utilized and done and performed differently, but they have the same mission.
Yep. And we have to get to that point where we trust people enough to let them in.
Yeah.
And there's some fear in that. There's some fear in that.
Very valid too, because like I feel like in some ways a lot of things and a lot of churchy words, we just say them for what we know and how they are necessarily understood in English. Like, you know, like even like the brokenhearted come and give you rest. Like some of those words in there, we are glancing over the fact like God will give you rest. Like that just doesn't mean he's going to give you a good night's sleep.
No.
Like that's not what that means. Or anything like this. Like, there's real fear. There's like those words are honestly sometimes so elementarized that it loses its power of what they really are. We understand like this stuff is scary. It's tough. It's not easy. But man, like we're all called. Every single one of us has as a call in Christ is to go therefore make disciples of all nations.
100%.
Like
Matthew 20:18.
Yep. And so, I mean, I have it tattooed on me so I don't forget it. But like, you know, with those, that's our calling as a whole. We are all going to aim and go in that direction. Yes, it's scary.
Sure.
Yes, there's difficulties, things that are easy and hard about it. And it's maybe easier or harder for others.
Yeah.
But like, man, like if we can all just jump on that train going in the same direction instead of us taking all the back roads and highways all in our individual cars, like the church is supposed to be unifying. And for a long time, we've been this commuter system when in reality, like, let's jump on like national transit. Like, let's jump on one train.
It's funny. The Holy Spirit just gave me a vision about when you talked about trains. You know, so many times I've seen movies where people are trying to catch a train.
Yep.
And people inside the train are saying, come on, run faster. Like Polar Express is a great thing, right? This little boy's trying so hard to run after this train. They're like, here, run faster.
And he turned into like a baby giraffe when it running. I don't know if it was the animation or what.
But what the church should be, we should be out on that rung, holding on, reaching our hand out.
Yep.
To bring them on the train.
Yep.
Right. And I think that we as a whole, we as a collective group need to do that way more.
Yeah. Because in reality, unlike a real train, God's train is constantly moving.
Sure.
There's nothing we're going to do or impact that's going to stop his train.
Correct.
It just may be moving at a different rate or maybe taking a bank or whatever. Like, it's constantly moving.
Yeah.
So it is one of those things of like, we can't just wait for the next stop.
Right.
Like that doesn't exist. You gotta yeet people on for
what was that word?
Yeet.
Yeet.
YEET. It is a technical term. It's actually in the dictionary.
Is it really? I gotta look it up when I get home.
It's in the dictionary. Put the definition of yeet.
Bottom.
Right there. Thank you. But essentially throw into grab, yank. Yeah, it's another good one.
Yeah.
Into this moving train that is God's mission.
Absolutely.
And, you know, on this side of heaven, like that boy's cooking. It's going.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's a beautiful thing. I'm happy we're able to sync up on that analogy because I do think it directly applies to what this is. I think that's a great ending point. So thank you all so much for listening and watching this amazing church conversation. Like I said, I love Brandon. He is like in my top 3 of humans on this side of eternity. And with that, I am so blessed and thankful y'all have gotten to hear from him. Hear even like how he operates and how he thinks, and how maybe it applies to me. You may even be able to compare and recognize some of those things of where it's like, oh, Bobby thinks in that same way, or oh, I've only known Bobby, I've never known Brandon. Now I know why he believes what he does. All those different things. But thank you so much for watching. Love y'all, and catch y'all on the next episode. Peace.